Capital One is our sponsor here at OSCON for a day of discussions about open source and why it is so important for new stack organizations everywhere. Capital One is at the forefront of this new open source world with several efforts such as the opening of its APIs and open sourcing core technologies such as Hygeia, its DevOps dashboard. Learn more about Capital One and its focus on developers at developer.capitalone.com. Alex Williams of the New Stack here at OSCON, and I am with Baruch Sadogursky.
That was very good and challenging, and you made it perfect.
Thank you. And Baruch is with JFrog, and he's the developer advocate.
Yes, I am.
At JFrog. First off, tell us about JFrog, a little bit about it, and in particular, I'm interested in Artifactory, which we have written about at the New Stack.
Right. And thank you for covering JFrog in general and Artifactory in particular, New Stack, and we appreciate it a great deal. We love the stories.
Thank you.
That you put out. So JFrog is a startup company established in Israel a decade ago. And we still have all the development done in Israel. The headquarters now in Santa Clara, California, and we have a European office in Toulouse, France. The Mediterranean, the beaches.
Yes.
We select our locations wisely.
Because that's what you do. You just sit on the beach all day and code, right?
Yes, absolutely. Right. So we have 3 products at the moment. Will be 4 next week. And the 3 that we have already is JFrog Artifactory, which is a universal artifact repository, Bintray, which is a universal distribution hub, and Mission Control, which manages Artifactory and multiple instances of Artifactory across the world and this kind of stuff. Next week we are having our own user conference in Napa, talking about good locations,
right?
And we're going to announce another one.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So so you were here at OSCON. It's an open source conference, and one of the topics we're really discussing is how companies are using open source, and how they're using it in their own development of their own services, and how that impacts the way their teams are organized, the way that how they share information internally, but then also participate externally. So I'm curious about the history of your products and your philosophy about open source in that context that I just described.
Well, that's open source is very relevant specifically for JFrog because Artifactory appeared because of people working more and more with open source, and especially in Java domain.
So tell me then how it appeared more because more and more people working in open source.
Right.
So explain that.
Yeah. So especially in the Java domain, we even a decade ago or 15 years ago, we already have a decent dependency management that allow people to use open source in their daily development. Right. It started with Maven, which allowed you to declare dependencies, and we are talking about declaring dependencies. Most of them were, of course, open source stuff like Commons Lang, Spring Framework, right? This kind of stuff, and as it worked back then, and it was the normal, it was the idea that those dependencies, those open source libraries were downloaded directly from the internet, and although it made them very, very approachable and of course increases the user of open source inside the organization, it has its own drawbacks, mainly in the management and availability aspects of using the open source. And that's exactly where Artifactory came to solve this problem as an open source project, right? We started as an open source project. We're still very proud of our open source version up until this day. It works, and of course the most used version of Artifactory is the Artifactory open source version. So this is where we started, and of course we use open source extensively inside JFrog as well. Being Artifactory is being a mainly Java project, uses tons of dependencies which are open source projects. Bintray is written on all the UI of all the web interface of Bintray is written in Grails, which is another open source project, right? We use Groovy in Sensibly, which is open source. All Java is open source, right? So if I think that we can safely say that 100% of our dependencies are open source, and most of our code is open source as well. So yes, we we stand on those foundations of open source, and this is why we exist, and this is what we promote as well.
So tell me then, how do you manage your internal engineering teams to focus on both your internal development but also in the participation of the open source communities?
So for managing the open source that we use, we of course use our own products, right? So we use Artifactory, we use Bintray, we eat our own frog food.
Right.
This is what we say.
We eat our own frog food.
Right. So and that of course helps managing and organizing the open source that we use, both in terms of having the offline caches, both in terms of having curated versions of what we want to use, analysis of open source licenses, what are we allowed to use, what we are not allowed to use, catching things like open source viral licenses that can hurt our non-open source version of Artifactory.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, for open source we are just fine, but since they use the same code base, we need to be cautious about that. So we use Artifactory and Bintray to manage our own open source dependencies. And if we are talking about supporting open source, both for Artifactory and for Bintray, we give away free instances and free accounts for open source projects. So you can use Artifactory and Bintray both free if you have open source project you want to publish.
So the people, so the people on your engineering team, do they participate pretty much exclusively in both realms, of both like the internal development and in the open source communities?
Yeah, so the project that we use, we give back the changes and the improvements that we do, right? And I would say most of the participation in the Rails ecosystem, when we maintain a number of plugins that we use for Bintray development, but also we used to use a library called Jackrabbit. We stepped away from it, but when we used it, we contributed a lot to Jackrabbit as well. And that's just two of the examples of how we contribute whatever changes and improvements we made to the open source that we use back to the community. Right, of course we have a pretty decent, I would say, GitHub organization, the JFrog Dev and another Bintray, when a lot of collaboration happens over open source projects. Most of the Artifactory plugins are open source and they are there on GitHub for people to participate, etc., etc.
Okay, and so tell us a little bit more about JFrog Artifactory. And you launched that last year, is that right? Or was it
Artifactory?
Or is that the older?
On December this year, we will celebrate a decade.
A decade. So what is the container repository? The container repository.
So big news. We continue add more and more support for more and more binaries and packaging technologies, both to Artifactory and Bintray. And I would say like around a year ago, we added support for Docker for both Artifactory and Bintray.
That's what I was thinking about.
Yes,
right.
and then that basically means that you can manage your Docker instances on Artifactory and distribute your Docker images from Bintray,
mm-hmm.
right? And we do pretty interesting stuff. For example, we allow I would say a classic promotion pipelines to be applied to Docker images. This is something which is, although seems reasonable and I would say default, it actually not so much, because when you look at how people work with Docker, there are different kinds of methodologies. All of them, although being new and very interesting, sometimes seem not as reliable as the old good promotion pipelines for continuous integration and delivery that we do for years in the normal software development. The way we develop with Java, with .NET, with NPM, with Ruby is well known and defined, but when you try to do the same with Docker images, it's not that easy.
Why?
Because of various reasons, mainly because a Docker image is something that is intended to be assembled from a Docker build file in very easy and powerful way, right? The Docker build is extremely powerful. Right. And very easy.
Right.
And that brings people to trend to build the new image every time they actually need a new image. right? Assuming that if you run Docker build from the same Docker file multiple times, you will get the same results. What we know for a fact is that that's not the case. A Docker build is just a bunch of dependency managements work together, starting from the from directive, which will pull a base image from out there, relying on the version or relying on the latest version or whatever you type there, and then it's a bunch of just apt-get installs and running scripts that downloads files, etc., etc. It's one piece of different dependency managers work together, either explicit or implicit. Mm-hmm. And that means that it's very hard, up to impossible, to make a Docker file which will remain stable across a significant period of time. Chances that you will get the same Docker image if you run the same Docker file build in a month, after a month, are very, very low, even if you try real hard. There are ways to do it, but it's very hard. So instead, what we advocate for and what we make available for developers that use Artifactory is the promotion of immutable, stable Docker images, which you build once and then promote across your continuous integration and delivery pipeline, ensuring that what you built, what you tested, what you stage is actually the exact same image you run your containers in production from. And though it seems obvious, it's not that easy to achieve, and we help people to do that.
And it's not that easy to achieve just because of, for example, what are some of the issues that you see customers running into?
Well, so one of the main barriers for doing it is having multiple repositories or multiple registries, as you can say, in one environment for Docker. Although, again, it seems like a no-brainer, it is actually pretty hard because of the structure of the Docker image tag and how the Docker registries are intended to be used. Mm-hmm. Because the general approach is that you have this space, which is your Docker registry inside your organization, and it's not very easily partitionable to represent different repositories in your lifecycle. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not very easy to have a separated and isolated space for your development, for your QA, and from your staging inside a single registry. Mm-hmm. And it's much more easily achieved in Artifactory just because of the fact that this is how we think, because this is what we did for years for other software development types, right? So when you talk about Java, again, I'm coming back to Java as being the origin for base for us and for a lot of practices in continuous integration and delivery. So in Java, it's very simple. You have your repositories inside Artifactory. This is your dev, this is your QA, this is your staging, and there are very simple and clean procedures on how to promote from one repository to another, bringing the metadata with it, annotating with new properties, etc. When you try to do the same in Docker registry, it's hard.
Why?
Docker tag, by its anatomy, is intended to have the host of your registry baked in. Okay. When you run a Docker tag command, you actually say, this is my host when this tag is going to, or it came from. And it doesn't have any more detailed partitioning into the path of this host. All you have is a host as a port. And then the real question is, okay, now I have to run two registries in the same host, because I need a registry for my development, and I need another registry for my QA, and then another one for staging and production. I need them on the same host. This is my organizational host. How do I do that? And there are dirty tricks, for example, using ports or virtual hosts to achieve it. Mm-hmm. But if it's not baked into the product, it's really hard. And then people say, you know what? I will build this pipeline not with the binaries, but I will do it with the sources. Right. I can promote my Docker file and I can build it on every stage, and it will be okay, and it won't.
Mm-hmm. So what happens?
So then exactly this is where Artifactory steps in, and what we can provide to the Docker users is this ability of promoting immutable images instead of promoting Docker files. And then they build it only once. The CI server actually builds the Docker image, and then we give REST APIs that will work in Artifactory to promote between different registers that you do have on your own host. And then images go from development to QA. They're getting pulled on the QA environment and tested on the QA environment, and then they are promoted from QA to staging, and etc., all the way to production. And then they can be distributed from bin tray, or they can install on the production servers, and all that by using internal Artifactory mechanisms and features that makes it actually very, very easy.
So it's fully ephemeral then?
Yeah, so that's...
So it's fully ephemeral then. What are the challenges that brings in with people who have existing platforms that, you know, we hear about this kind of discussion about state versus statelessness, right?
Right.
You know, and you have this full ephemeral platform, right? What about that other part of it, right? You know, where like there is that need for state. It's not always going to be stateless.
Right. Yep. So this is something which, if you're talking about the platform of the continuous integration, which we are part of, and the continuous with Artifactory, right, and the continuous delivery, which we are part of with Bintray, then the stateless server is a very good idea. We believe in it, and we do as much as we can to allow to have this stateless servers for your continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline with our tools, right? So, for example, Artifactory is available as a Docker container, and this Docker container is absolutely stateless. Of course, you need to store the files, you need to store the metadata about the files, and then you do it with the tools that Docker allows you, like volume mounts, right, and volume containers and all this kind of stuff, and it actually works pretty well. But the servers themselves will be as stateless as possible. And this is what allows us to do the high availability as well, right? So Artifactory is the only highly available artifact repository out there. And that's again because the servers themselves are stateless, and they're riding on the shared data storages for the artifacts and the metadata.
Excellent. Well, Baruch, is there anything is there anything we can expect from JFrog in the next few months in terms of, you know, will you be continuing to like build on the features with JFrog Artifactory, or are you going to be introducing new products?
Well, so not only next month, but actually next week we have our user conference that we announced tons of things.
Right.
First of all, we will have a new product that will improve your ability to manage your data centers in a magnificent way. That's what I believe, and I'm very excited about it. But also, of course, tons of new features in Artifactory, in bin tray mission control. And I would say the theme of what we are going to talk about next week is how those separate, integrated but still separate products are becoming one, are becoming what we call the JFrog platform, and how the integration get tighter, get more intense in how you work together with all of the JFrog products to build, to move faster from development to production, to move faster from an idea to a product. Right, we are in the business of speed.
Right.
Every company is a software company, and that means that delivering software faster for every company has a great significance in getting this competitive advantage on top of their competitors in their market. And that's exactly what we help doing. We help moving the code faster in those pipelines of continuous integration, continuous delivery, going from the sources to the binaries all the way to production. So the JFrog platform is the next big thing for us.
Well, we'll look forward to learning more about it. So after your user conference. So Baruch, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure chatting with you, and thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, we'll be back soon. Thanks a lot. Capital One is our sponsor here at OSCON for a day of discussions about open source and why it is so important for new stack organizations everywhere. Capital One is at the forefront of this new open source world, with several efforts such as the opening of its APIs and open sourcing core technologies such as Hygeia, its DevOps dashboard. Learn more about Capital One and its focus on developers at developer.capitalone.com.